My family rented a lake house every summer growing up. Same one, same week in July, out on a lake in northern Wisconsin. This happened the last summer we ever went, when I was 16, and it's the reason we stopped going back. The house sat on a private stretch of shoreline with an old wooden dock that had clearly been there longer than the house itself. Warped boards, rusted nails, the kind of dock parents tell you to be careful on every single summer without fail. My little brother, Sam, was 10 that summer, and he loved that dock more than anything else at that house. Spent hours lying on his stomach at the edge of it, staring down into the water, watching for fish. About 3 days into our trip, Sam started telling us there was a lady who lived under the dock. Not swimming near it, under it, in the shadowed dark space beneath the boards, where the water was too deep and too murky to see anything clearly, even in daylight. He said she watched him while he lay there. He said she never came out during the day, only right around dusk, and only if he happened to be alone at the water's edge. We laughed it off at first, the way you naturally do with a kid's imagination. Figured he'd picked up the idea from some cartoon or a story a cousin told him. But Sam stopped wanting to go near the dock at all after about day 5, which struck me as genuinely strange, considering how much he'd loved it just days before. When I asked him directly why, he looked at me very seriously for a 10-year-old and said, "She asked me to come find her." That night, my dad and I walked down to the dock with a flashlight, mostly to put Sam's mind at ease and prove there was nothing there, half expecting to find nothing but murky lake water and maybe a curious fish drawn to the light. We shined the beam straight down between the boards into the dark space underneath. Something moved. Fast. Low. Close to the surface. Gone before either of us could really process what we'd actually seen. My dad said afterward it was probably a large fish or a beaver startled by the sudden light. I remember very clearly his voice not sounding fully convinced of his own explanation, even as he said it. We asked the property owner about it the next morning, half joking, trying to laugh a little about our own reaction from the night before. She didn't laugh with us. She told us, very matter of fact, like she'd explained this before to other guests, that a young girl had drowned near that exact dock decades earlier, well before she'd even owned the property herself, and that every so often, kids staying at the house would mention a lady under the dock who wanted them to come play. She said it happened almost exclusively with kids around Sam's age, and almost always toward the end of a family's stay, never at the very beginning. We left 2 days early that year. Nobody in my family ever said exactly why out loud to each other, but nobody argued about leaving early either. Sam's 26 now. He doesn't remember most of what he told us that summer, or at least claims he doesn't when it comes up. But he still won't go near docks, any dock at all, anywhere, and gets quiet and short with people if they push him on why. I've never told him what my dad and I actually saw that night with the flashlight. I don't think I ever will. I need to say up front that I've gone back and forth for months about whether to share this, mostly because I don't want anyone to think I'm exaggerating for attention. I'm not. I still have every photo I'm about to describe, saved in multiple places, because some nights I genuinely need to look at them again, just to confirm I didn't imagine the whole thing. My husband and I bought a lake house in the Adirondacks 2 years ago, an older property that had been empty for almost 3 years before we purchased it. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had left behind most of their furniture, and tucked inside a hallway closet, we found a shoebox full of old Polaroid photographs, family photos, clearly taken at that exact house over what looked like decades. The same dock, the same shoreline, the same kitchen window visible in the background of half the shots. We kept the box out of curiosity more than anything, occasionally flipping through it on quiet evenings, half charmed by the idea of the house's history. About 4 months in, I noticed something in one of the older photos I hadn't paid attention to before. A family of 4 standing on the dock, dated on the back in faded pen, 1981. Ordinary enough. Except the little girl in that photo, maybe 7 or 8 years old, was wearing a bright yellow raincoat I recognized immediately because it was hanging in our own front hall closet, left behind by whoever lived there before the elderly couple we'd bought it from. Same coat, same exact pattern of small white flowers along the collar. Unmistakable, not just similar. I mentioned it to my husband, who assumed it was simply a popular style from that era, nothing more. I wanted to believe that too. Then, 3 weeks later, we started taking our own photos at the house, just casual ones on my phone. Sunset over the water, my husband grilling on the deck, that kind of thing. When I went to print a few favorites at a local shop for our own hallway wall, the shop attendant handed me back an extra print I hadn't ordered, saying it had come through in our batch. It was a photo of our dock, taken from roughly the same angle as several of the old Polaroids in the shoebox. Standing at the end of it, faint but unmistakable, was that same little girl in the yellow raincoat, facing away from the camera toward the water. Nobody in our photos that day had been wearing a yellow raincoat. My husband checked his phone. I checked mine. Neither of us had taken that specific shot at all. We drove back to the print shop the next morning to ask about it directly. The attendant looked confused, checked the batch on her system, and told us there was no record of that image ever being uploaded, printed, or existing in our order at all, despite the fact that I was holding the physical print in my own hand, while she said it. We put the shoebox of old photos back in that closet and never looked through it again. I still find myself, most evenings around dusk, glancing out toward the dock before I close the curtains, half expecting, half dreading, to see a small yellow shape standing there facing the water. We haven't taken a single photo at that house since. This happened at my uncle's lake house in rural Minnesota, somewhere he'd owned for almost 30 years before he finally sold it 2 summers ago. I need to say up front that loons, the birds, make an incredibly distinct, eerie call at night, a long, wavering cry that echoes across still water for miles. Anyone who spent real time at a northern lake knows that sound intimately, grows up hearing it as just part of the background of summer nights. This is not that. I need you to understand that going in, because everything that follows only makes sense if you know what a normal loon call actually sounds like first. I was staying there alone for a week, house-sitting while my uncle traveled overseas, something I'd done several summers in a row without any issue at all. The lake had a healthy loon population, and I was used to hearing their calls most nights, usually somewhere off in the distance, always eventually fading naturally into silence after 10 or 15 seconds, the way they always do. On my 3rd night alone, sitting out on the screened porch with a book I wasn't really reading, I heard a call that started exactly like a normal loon cry. The same wavering pitch, the same haunting quality I'd heard 100 times before. Except it didn't fade the way it always did. It got louder, closer, and around the 2-minute mark, still going, far longer than any loon call I'd ever heard in my life. The sound shifted into something that no longer resembled a bird call at all. It dropped low, guttural, almost like a distorted human voice, trying to mimic the pitch of a loon and failing partway through, breaking into something wetter and more animal. I sat frozen on that dark porch, completely still, telling myself it had to be some kind of vocal variation I'd simply never encountered before. Some rare thing this specific bird did that I just hadn't heard in previous summers. It went quiet eventually, all at once. No gradual fade at all. I went inside and locked every single door in that cabin for the first time in 3 summers of staying there completely alone. The next night, it happened again, right around the same time, just after 11 p.m. Same pattern exactly. Normal loon call at first, extending far past any normal length, sliding into that same guttural distortion partway through. This time, though, it seemed to be coming from directly beneath the dock itself, close to shore, not out on the open water, where loons actually live and typically call from. I called my uncle the next morning, half embarrassed about it, expecting him to laugh at me for getting spooked by a bird after all these years of visiting that lake. He didn't laugh at all. He went quiet on the phone for a long moment, long enough that I asked if he was still there, then admitted that he'd heard it too, more than once over the 3 decades he'd owned that property, and that he'd stopped staying there completely alone entirely because of it, always making sure to have at least one other person in the cabin with him whenever he visited from that point forward. He never gave me a real explanation for what it actually was, just told me to come home early if I possibly could, and that he'd tell me more about it once I got back safely. He never did tell me more, even after I asked directly more than once. And eventually, I stopped asking.